Anyway, I have to give Elaine Chuang credit for suggesting tonight's presentation. If you know Elaine, you already know that she volunteers for many, many worthwhile projects, such as the WOS meetings, but also the Puget Sound Bird Observatory study of secretive birds. Begun 6 years ago, this project monitors underdetected wetland species that include American Bittern, Sora, Virginia rail, green heron, and pied-bill grebe. And it's conducted in wetlands across 9 Puget Sound counties to assess their population trends. Thanks to Elaine, I was able to get in touch with Cynthia Easterson, who manages PSBO's Regional Wetland Secretive Bird Monitoring Project, and she agreed to give a presentation about it to us tonight. Cindy also provides oversight for a wide variety of other avian monitoring projects, and you can see the list right there, and has served on the board of PSBO since 2010. She holds an integrated Bachelor of Arts and Science degree with a focus on wetland science from the University of Washington. The Secretive Birds Monitoring Project is ongoing, and if you find yourself wanting to join the corps of volunteers who conduct the monitoring, Cindy will explain what's involved and how you can do so. Now it's my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Cindy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to work through the screen sharing here. Perfect. We've got it. Good, we're up. I just want to thank the WOS organization so much for giving me an opportunity to come and share about this specific project. It's very dear to my heart, and so having an opportunity to kind of broadcast this information across to the WOS supporters and members is really exciting for me. So thank you. I really appreciate, Vicki, the wonderful introduction you gave me. I just, want to reiterate that I'm just a bird nerd. I have enough education in the natural sciences to be dangerous, but that I combine with a passion for learning everything I can about birds. And fortunately, a few years ago, I happened to stumble across Puget Sound Bird Observatory, and they are just a relatively small organization, but certainly a group of dedicated scientists, researchers, bird enthusiasts, and volunteers who are working all together to strengthen our knowledge of our region's birds and avian residents. So we are engaged in a lot of projects. You saw maybe some of them on that rotating slide at the very beginning. Of course, tonight we're going to talk specifically about the Regional Wetland Secretive Bird Monitoring. But we also just brought the Puget Sound Seabird Survey under our umbrella. And I know that probably several of you that are on the meeting tonight are participants in that organization. And we just are excited to work with this new group of volunteers. And of course, if any of you are interested in getting involved with that project, we are so excited to be partnering with Toby Ross, who manages that project for us. And I'm sure we would all love to hear about your interest in that too, as we look at some of these opportunities for people to get engaged with us. We started out primarily as a group of bird banders, and so several of our projects, like the Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship, or MAPS, is a program that seasonally bands birds during the breeding season so that we can understand how birds are faring. Microaging project is also a banding project that really takes a strong look at molt and understanding molt in some of our common birds like song sparrows. We do a lot of monitoring in estuaries and some site development monitoring, where we have this opportunity to look at the landscape prior to construction and post-construction to kind of gauge how that project has impacted bird populations. We've done some really fun stuff with heron nest platforms that we'll be taking another look at this year to kind of see how those are perhaps working for heronries that are sort of in decline. And then hopefully this year, we're going to get started as hosting some towers for the new MODIS wildlife tracking system. So we have a lot of sticks in the stew, and welcome engagement with those projects. But again, tonight, the main focus is going to be on our regional wetland secretive bird monitoring program. So we might begin by just asking the question, why count birds in these landscapes? Well, in part because wetlands are our most productive ecosystems in the world. They provide a broad suite of valuable services for both society and the environment. But unfortunately, Washington State has lost nearly 31% of those wetlands due to commercial development, urbanization, agriculture, pollution. And even though great strides have been made in recognizing and protecting these critical areas, there's still a lot of work to be done. And we can use the presence of wetland obligate birds to kind of help us better understand responses to ecosystem health across these wetlands. So we don't want to conflate the idea that finding strong bird populations in these wetlands is a direct indication of the health of these wetlands, because there's lots of things that happen in these wetlands that may be healthy wetlands that don't necessarily support wetland bird populations. But having that tool in the toolbox, understanding where we find these wetland obligate birds, is one of the lenses that we can kind of look through to see how healthy these wetlands are. So that's one reason for counting these spaces. But we also want to just sort of look at these spaces as a place of awe for us. You know, we live in a part of the world where a lot of us live here, or love part of why we love living here is because we are connected to a lot of really wonderful natural environments. And you don't have to drive down the road too long before you'll see bumper stickers on the backs of cars that say things like "Mountains, please," or you'll see emblems of our beautiful Cascade Mountains. But we also have these beautiful wetlands all throughout our region. You know, we are definitely an area of wetlands, and I find these wetlands, even though quite often we think of mountains as sort of those giving us a sense of the sacred, you know, I really look at these wetlands and think of them very much in the same way, with a sense of awe. And I always like to approach them, and we teach this in our training, to please enter these landscapes with an attitude of gratitude and reciprocity, having that relationship with these really special places, and being intentionally respectful for the space and the inhabitants. So we asked why count birds across these landscapes, but maybe the question that we really should be asking is why count these birds, these specific secretive wetland birds. And I love this little quote. Dr. Elliott Coues was not only a physician back in the 1800s, but he was also a bird enthusiast, and he studied American Bittern and wrote quite a few papers on them. And so you can find these papers in these really old journals of ornithology. And in one of them, he writes about the American Bittern. He prefers solitude and leads the eccentric life of a recluse, forgetting the world and by the world forgot. I love the little quote because it sort of brings to mind that these birds are very much out of sight and sometimes out of mind. And they're also seldom picked up by our sort of classic landscape scale monitoring efforts, which would include breeding bird surveys that sort of pick up the bird populations through the breeding months or the summer months. And then we have the Christmas bird count that picks up birds in the winter on the wintering grounds. And if you look at these maps from the Breeding Bird Survey for American Bittern, Virginia rail, and Sora, And notice that the pink is kind of what is indicating where these birds sort of reside. You'll notice that that all of our areas around the Puget Sound Trough are basically look as though there are no members of these species, anywhere around. And I'm going to just toss in the bald eagle, the mount for the bald eagle at this point, because later on, I would just want to kind of show you, since the bald eagle is one of those birds that gets held out as sort of a conservation effort success. We actually were recognizing a lot more bald eagles than we ever recognized were across the landscape for some of these wetland obligate birds. Again, if we look at the Christmas bird count, which counts birds in the wintering grounds, you can see that these counts, these little, micro amounts of these birds were sort of picked up. And of course, part of that is because some of these birds move out of the area in the winter, just really aren't around. But mostly it's because these are birds that are very difficult to survey. So we just weren't getting, the kinds of numbers that we needed to see. Here's, numbers on the Virginia rail, maybe seeing a little bit higher numbers on the Christmas bird count because some of these birds do stay here through the winter. If we look at Sora in there, though, again, you can see that, numbers are very low for finding those birds as compared to the bald eagle during the same time period. We're seeing the bald eagle recover, population numbers. And then, look way down here, we just weren't detecting these birds. So the reason we really want to kind of take a look at these birds is because they're underdetected. Underdetected, I should say underdetected by the two main landscape scale survey efforts for which a lot of our wildlife management or species management or conservation strategies or conservation efforts rely on. And so these birds were just simply out of the picture, which kind of goes back to that little saying about the American bittern, forgotten almost. And yet, if we look at, reported sightings from eBird, you can see that there is just a huge difference between what our landscape scale monitoring efforts were looking at and what birders were observing out there. So this looked like kind of an opportunity for Puget Sound Bird Observatory to kind of step in and kind of figure out what's really happening and see if we couldn't put something on the ground that would help identify where these birds were at and in what numbers. So we started in about 2016, 2017, and I have to be honest and transparent and say that we were a much smaller organization then. We were stumbling a little bit in terms of how to do this. I think these were species of birds that were actually pretty new to all of us. We didn't really have a lot of experience with them, but we set out these goals for this monitoring effort. We really wanted this to be a long-term monitoring so that we could understand trends and status of these species. It was important that we engage community scientists or volunteer field scientists to do this work. It just was, we could see that this was going to be a massive effort that would take lots of people. And it wasn't the kind of thing that an agency could take on because it just simply would not be cost effective for them. So we're so appreciative of the folks that have joined our team to be these volunteer scientists out in the field to monitor these birds. And then ultimately, we really want this information, to be accessible so that these birds are not left off the information, that there wasn't this information gap that would be readily available to agencies and organizations who are doing the actual land management and wildlife species management. So we started off with 4 wetland obligate species: American bittern, Sora, Virginia rail, and green heron. And then we also took a look or wanted to include, since we're out in these spaces, these wetland spaces, we wanted to include willow flycatcher, primarily because their populations were declining, and it was an opportunity for us to just sort of add some information to the organizations that were sort of looking at those population declines. And then marsh wren, that was a species of concern, in part because a marsh wren will utilize a declining wetland until all of a sudden it just can't any longer. It can't survive in that sort of inhabitant, that in a wetland that has declined to that degree. And so we had the potential of having a real drop, some sort of bomb happen to these populations of marsh wrens. So it's one that we're kind of keeping a little bit of an eye on as well. And then last year, we began to coordinate with some researchers in Canada who were doing very similar studies to what we were doing here in the Puget Sound area. They were monitoring wetland birds across parts of Canada, particularly in British Columbia. So we sort of combined, and they wanted to include pipe-billed grebe. So last year was the first year we added pipe-billed grebe to this effort. So with all of these birds, they each are individually a little bit different. And we needed to kind of identify a way to select the habitats that we would be studying. And so we chose American Bittern as our target, and just understanding the breeding criteria and the habitat needs of the American Bittern is really what helped us sort of pick and choose the wetlands that we were going to monitor. Those wetlands, in order to sort of match what the American Bittern would need, tend to be a little bit larger, so greater than 7 acres. They need to have that emergent vegetation at the edges because that's what they nest in. That's where they're finding their prey. And then for us, this accessibility for community science efforts was important, since that was the team that we were going to use. And so initially, that really meant across a lot of public lands or public wetlands. In the last couple of years, we have included a lot more private spaces. We've really had some great partnerships with agencies like utilities and land stewardship agencies, so that we're able to get on a lot more private properties. But regardless, for the most part, we have to, we're putting a lot of folks out in these wet spaces, so we needed to make sure that they were accessible. And then began our search for what wetlands we were going to include in this study. And that really started out with just a desktop review. We're looking at wetland maps, and we're looking where birders are finding these species. It means a lot of ground truthing, going out to taking a look at those wetlands to whether or not to include. And we also had to be a little bit understanding our own limitations for how many wetlands we would be able to study. So we started out pretty small. After we selected a wetland and did the ground truthing, maps were created for each of the wetlands that we included in the study. This is probably a familiar place for quite a few of you. This is out by Spencer Island, and you can see that there's observation points here, and each observation point is given a specific alphanumeric number, and they're strategically placed apart. So this particular map would be a route for this wetland for observation. Those maps and directions for each of the wetlands that we study are put together into documents to help our volunteers not only find the wetland and figure out how to navigate to each of the observation points, but all of this is sort of documented and kept on Google Drive. When we do our training, we train our folks how to access all of these documents from Google Drive and how to download the pertinent information. People sign up on a Google Drive document for the wetlands that they would like to monitor. So when we started out, again, we needed to start small, and we started in the place where most of us live, which was in King and Snohomish County. Then we branched out in 2018 to include Skagit and Pierce County. And then in 2021, we kind of finalized getting ourselves all the way around the Puget Sound Trough by adding Whatcom, Thurston, Mason, Kitsap, and Island counties. And then this past year, 2022, we did survey 139 wetlands with approximately 500, probably a little more, probably closer to 700 survey points. So fortunately, we didn't have to come up with a protocol on our own. There's standard protocols for monitoring marsh birds, and we adopted the standard protocol. We worked with Courtney Conway, who was the author of this. We do have a few variants. The sound file that we use to broadcast the sounds for callback. That's how we detect these birds, is typically they respond to a sound file, a callback. Ours is specific for birds here in the Pacific Northwest. And but we it's nice that there's a standard protocol for us to follow. We've also kind of found out that that time spent in working with our volunteers and training our volunteers is really rewarding. Not only is it rewarding because we get to work with these remarkable people, but it also results in more accurate data and engaged volunteers. If they know the more they know about the project, the more engaged they get. And PSBO has really, I think, prides ourselves on our training opportunities. We train across a variety of protocols, including point counts, distance sampling, line transects, area counts. Now we've included the Puget Sound Seabird Survey, so we have trainings available for that. We teach our volunteers how to use a wide range of equipment, including rangefinders and navigational tools, and then also how to just manage the documents. It doesn't do us any good to go out there and collect the data if we don't get the data actually on the data sheets correctly, and then into the spreadsheets and the different programs to do the analysis. So we've spent a lot of time in training. We find that really reaps rewards. And we also have just a huge respect for our team. I mean, we really value what I like to call experiential knowledge. I think of experiential knowledge as being, in a way, you've probably heard the term indigenous knowledge. I'm not going to say that they're the same thing, but I think that that experiential knowledge really builds a different way of knowing, and we really value, because it adds a lot to our projects. So when we train, these are just some of our training opportunities. You can see that we train in the classroom and in the field. We offer beginning bird bander training, as well as some of the training for monitoring estuaries. Down here in the corner, right here where my pointer is, that's one of our field practicums for this project. monitoring wetland birds. And we work in some kind of, challenging landscapes. And so we really do emphasize safety, care, and, certainly teamwork. We want everyone to stay safe out there as well as have an awesome experience. And we also, in terms of safety, we also include safety of our equipment. For this wetland bird project, we check out broadcast equipment to you. We check out range finders, other tools that you might need to complete this project. And that all comes to a fairly hefty sum. And so, we also sort of like to make sure that you keep the equipment safe and handy. So I'm going to just run through sort of the steps that you take to sort of monitor to do a wetland monitoring. And what that includes is you would, after your training, you would select the wetlands that you would like to monitor. Some people select wetlands that are near their home, although we really encourage people to, if they can travel a little bit and, step out of their comfort zone. We have some great wetlands in some of our outlying counties like Whatcom County and down in the South Puget Sound area, island counties and Kitsap areas where we have a harder time getting surveyors recruited and able. So, we really encourage folks as they're looking through our list of 140, 160 wetlands, take a look at some of those that are not so close to home, and you might find some really special places to not only conduct the survey, but to just find some really cool spots out there. Once you've selected a wetland and downloaded all of the instructions for what that wetland is like and where the observation points are and how to get there, you would drive to the wetland, navigate to the observation point, set up your broadcast equipment, which is a 20-minute, it's a 10-minute broadcast, but we run through it twice. And it starts out with 5 minutes of silence. And the reason for that is detectability. We want to know if we weren't encouraging these birds to respond to us or to call back, how many birds would we detect in the landscape? And so this 5 minutes of silence that's on our broadcast is to sort of gauge that piece. And then, since we're studying these 5 wetland birds, we have 5 minutes basically of vocalization. So it'll be vocalizations of a Sora, and then there'll be 30 seconds of silence. Then there's vocalizations that a Virginia rail would make, 30 seconds of silence, and all the way to the end of the 10-minute tape. The one thing that we do that's a little different from the standard protocol is that we run through that broadcast twice. So you're at each observation point for, a little over 20 minutes, which can be a long time if there's not a lot going on, or it can be a very exciting time if there's a lot of things going on. So, and then once you finish the broadcast, you would move to the next observation point and repeat that process. So we know that birders are experiential people, and what makes a good day birding is spotting a cool bird. Certainly spotting a cool bird. And as we were just sort of chatting prior to the meeting, and we were hearing about some of the cool birds that people were spotting just over the last couple of days, you can hear the excitement, knowing that brought an element of a special moment and a sense of awe to those that found something special in the new year. But we also, because we're experiential people, we enjoy that space, being in some really cool environment and just experiencing the awe and wonder of nature. So in order to take you on a journey of what it's sort of like to be engaged in this project, I wanted to share just a few stories with you. I'm going to take you out with me into the wetlands, hopefully through these stories, and hopefully you will be able to sort of experience what it's like to maybe take some of these, be a wetland bird monitor. So the first story is, I just have titled it, A Naturalist and a Bittern Walk into a Wetland. So it was an early morning, and it was still cold and damp with morning dew. And as I pulled into the farmyard parking lot, I stopped and got all of my equipment out of the car, pulled on my waders, and made my way down to the farm gates. So this wetland happens to be really one of my favorite wetlands in all of the suite of wetlands that we do. And what makes it special in part is that this used to be, of course, originally it was a riverine wetland, but then with settlement, ancestors here came in and started a dairy farm. And so they did a lot of draining, and they had the dairy in this particular spot, a very successful dairy for years, family legacy farm that passed down through generation from generation. But dairying is a very hard life, and the current generation was just feeling that they wanted to do something different with this land. And so what they did was they went through a rewilding process and let the wetlands come back, recreate the wetlands. And it serves as a mitigation banking farm. But it really is one of my special places. But to get to it, they still have a few animals left on the farm, just a few. But one of the things they have is a giant bull. And normally that bull is in the pen to the left side of this screen that you see now. But on that particular morning, when I went to survey this wetland, the bull was in the field right behind the gate there. So I passed through the gate, and both I and the bull are eyeing each other to just sort of measure each one up. And keep in mind that I am now in waders. And for any of you who have walked through a landscape in waders, you know that they kind of squeak and they kind of make a swishing noise. And that bull sort of looked at me as I walked down through this path, and eventually obviously thought that anything that sounded that ridiculous couldn't be of a threat. So he let me pass through, and I pass on through to the next gate and head on to the right where the wetlands lie. Those trees, those really tall trees that you see at the, kind of at the center and top of the screen there, there's a pair of red-tailed hawks nesting there, and they are screeching loudly. They are not happy that I'm in the area, and they obviously resented my presence. There's a cacophony of other bird sounds as I, march my way down into the wetland, and I can hear, the ducks quacking and the geese honking and the warblers and the sparrows, and just all of the birds in the trees are sort of, vocalizing. As they vocalize, I have these little images that are clicking through my head, almost like an old time view master, oh, there's a yellow warbler. Oh, there's a black-throated gray warbler. All of these images are sort of coming, to mind, because there's just so many birds in that, wonderful repopulated willow forest that's there. The vegetation is really tall, and I'm sort of pushing my way through a lot of brush, so a lot of down limbs. I'm thankful for my waders because the water is quickly rising over my knees, and the muck pulls at my feet with each step. Every now and then, though, there are these sort of high points in the in the way. And it's just so fun to kind of look down in the mud of these high points, and I see the footprints of elk and beaver and other wildlife that abound in this space. As I get to my observation point, my destination point, I'm kind of, my feet are in a foot of water, but I'm looking for, some branches or some thick shrubbery or something where I can, set up the broadcast equipment and sort of hang it from the trees that are there. Limited somewhat by the vegetation, but I do come across a spot where I have a clear view of a ponded area that looks promising for these wetland bird species that we're looking for. I start the broadcast, and it starts in that 5 minutes of silence. It really is one of my favorite times in the survey process. For these 5 minutes of silence, of course, its purpose, as we talked before, is to better understand detectability. But for me, it's just this wonderful silent time where I get to accept the gifts of nature. There's really something special about being just quiet in these spaces for a while. However, this particular morning at minute 4, I'm startled by a loud whinnying call directly behind me and only about 10 meters away. I scan under the wetland shrubs for any sign of the Sora, but it eludes my vision. In just one more minute, the broadcast starts playing through, and it starts with the Sora call, but that particular individual that had called earlier stays quiet. He fails to respond back, perhaps perceiving the trickery of human surveyors. The broadcast, however, does elicit responses from 2 Virginia rails lurking in the reeds right in front of me that I hadn't noticed before. One flies over near my feet to explore the intruder in his neck of the woods. And deep in the reeds, I hear the booming call of a bittern. It comes closer. It peers out between the stalks like a child peering into a forbidden room. And then it steps out. It ruffles its feathers and booms its odd call. Let's see if we can. I wish I was a little bit better with a camera. I have to leave those that to Elaine, and unfortunately she wasn't with me that day. But I did get this video, which was sort of amazing to me, and you can hear these really unique and odd sounds that these birds make. Since we do play our broadcast twice, I was once more treated to that second 5 minutes of silence. The birds that I've noticed, both this American Bittern and the Virginia rail, who are still very much in view, they crouch down, guarded from my presence. The second play back sort of rattles them, and I do feel a bit guilty at disturbing them the second time. But as is often the case, new individuals respond, and I end the survey knowing that there's a wealth and a wonder in this space. Oh. So for a second little short story, I'm going to take you up into the woods, and I call this story Barely There. This particular experience happened a couple months after my husband had knee replacement surgery. And so even though he often is my constant companion on these kinds of surveys, at that point in time, he just, he was driving, but certainly wasn't able to handle rough roads or cross-country hiking. So he stayed in the car, and I hiked into this little private utility land site to survey this little small wooded wetland. There is bear scat everywhere, and I am wary. always cognizant that this is much more their space than mine. To get to the survey spot, I have to thrash my way through brush and thicket. I balance across a log and I wade out to a small peninsula. I start the broadcast again, relishing those precious moments of silence when I can just sit and absorb the wonders around me. The broadcast plays through, but there's no response. The second playback runs through, but the only avian sounds are those coming from a dozen tree swallows hawking insects above the water. I pack up the equipment and I turn to head out. No target species detected, I write on the data sheet. But then just as I head into the woods, I am hit with sort of that eerie and very loud sound coming from a pied-billed grebe. I never see the bird, but as I continue on out of the forest, what had been a very quiet forest up to that point, I am reminded that there is much, much in the landscape that goes undetected. And as I walk out, I'm even more careful watching for bear. There's our bear. And the final story I put in here partly as a tribute to many of you, especially you, many of you WOS members, Audubon members who lead trips, who mentor and really guide youth. I put this little story in here for you. I am so impressed with the young people that we get to participate in this project every now and then. I noticed one of our surveyors earlier on in the rotating screen as being a recipient of the Patrick Sullivan Award, and it's always just such a joy to run into these amazing young birders. And so many of you have been mentors to those birders. I often ask folks, our young people that join us, how did you get into birding? And you would be, I think, surprised and thrilled how many of them bring up your names. Those of you who have led a trip or encouraged a young birder, your names, you're not forgotten. These folks remember. I just very, very recently lost a parent, and that always sort of puts you in a space of mind of thinking about your own legacy or your own influence. And I always like to think that maybe it's some points in time, maybe I can influence some of these young folks and get them connected to the natural world. So on this particular day, I was surveying a wetland that it's an urban wetland, it's a restoration mitigation site, and there really is very little about this wetland to impress. It's surrounded by a crush of development. The space is noisy with nearby traffic. There's rows of apartments and nearby shopping. There are 3 survey points on this route, and even though for the other stories I sort of gushed about that 5 minutes of silence and how much I enjoy it, I can tell you that within the cacophony of this urban environment, I don't enjoy those 5 minutes. I'm just those 5 minutes or the 20 minutes of each broadcast sometimes can seem like a very long time out there. So I was glad to sort of be done with this urban wetland survey, and I walked back to the car. And as I was tossing my equipment into the car, I looked up and I noticed that there was a group of Earth Corps volunteers getting ready to go out into the wetland to do some planting. And this picture is not them, by the way. This was just what I grabbed off, but it was a similar group. Young people, Earth Corps shirts on, and the vests and tools in hand, and they were standing around in a circle, kind of waiting for everything to kind of get started. So I went on over to them. I approached them, and I just asked, I said, you know, when you're out doing your planting and your work out there, do you ever hear or come across any wetland birds? And they made the comment that they really didn't know very much about birds. So I showed them the images, and I played quite a few of the broadcasts that these birds make, because they're so different, they're so unique. And as I was playing through them, one of the young people, you know, his jaw dropped and his, you know, his mouth came open, and he sort of slaps his head and he says, "Oh man," he says, "that's dope." He said, he'd never really heard of birds that made those kinds of sounds or sort of looked that way, and he was pretty excited about it. I think that's a Virginia rail, and it's your Virginia rail, and you know, being able to show these young people sort of what these birds look like and what they sound like sort of gave them a new perspective. And even though at my age, I might not really appreciate sort of the expression that they used, I can certainly appreciate the fact that when those young people walked out into the wetland to do their planting, their heads were sort of swiveling from side to side, sort of keeping an eye out for wetland birds. And I hope this in their work that they had that opportunity to maybe hear some of those birds in person. So so those are just some experiences that I had. I hope that kind of helps put you in some of those watery landscapes and helps you sort of, you know, begin a relationship with some of these really special birds. And, you know, those are kind of my comments, but we also get these great comments from our beautiful team of volunteers as well. You know, folks that have worked on this project often claim that they've discovered treasures while out surveying, you know, new experiences, new elements. A lot of them are surprised to see the amount of community involvement. A lot of the wetlands that we work in, there's community groups that have developed things like Friends of the Wetland, who are, you know, doing some efforts to try to keep those wetlands pristine and serviceable. And then, and of course, you know, there's the idea that being engaged in a community science project also sort of gives your birding kind of a purpose. We hear that quite often. I will say though that my favorite of all of the comments that we had, or one of my favorites, is certainly this one, where this team member said, "It was a great joy to be asked to stop and listen. In a time when we are constantly asked to click, comment, or lean in, many secrets of nature were revealed by simply sparing a few minutes to hear." So now you've hopefully, you know, a little bit about the project and how we run it, but let's find out. What did we find? Well, of course, first of all, we found cool birds. A couple pictures here that our friend Elaine took. So nice Virginia rail and a beautiful marsh wren there. Bittern we do come across. For last year's effort, 2022, we surveyed at 139 wetlands, and we survey over 3 distinct windows. So basically we have a survey and 2 replicates, just to, for a number of reasons. One is just to validate, you know, the survey information that we're getting. And then also these birds are they're not all the same. They are different. They come in and out of the wetlands at different times. So as we look across these 3 windows, it just gives us good rounded information and sort of validates the information that we're getting in. Each survey route has between 2 and 6 observation points typically. So we surveyed our team surveyed at, approximately 700 observation points, keeping in mind that each one of these takes about 20 minutes to complete, maybe longer if you're trucking a fair amount in and setting up the equipment. So, when you think about that, multiply the hours that are engaged in this project, it's really pretty impressive. So I can't say enough wonderful things about our avian monitors. We have approximately 100 people who helped us with this project, and we certainly thank them for the gift of their time and talent. So let's, this project, as I kind of mentioned, it sort of grew organically. We started out in King and Snohomish County kind of over the 2016-2017 time. And we started out small, just, a little under 40 wetlands that we sort of took a look at. We knew we wanted to expand it. The whole goal from the beginning was to get this regional look, all around the Puget Sound Trough. But we did have to sort of grow slowly. By 2019, we had hit 4 counties, but we still had sort of this, bulk of the wetlands that we were looking at were in King and Snohomish County. In 2021, we were able to expand into all the counties, but you can see that we didn't have nearly the depth number of wetlands that we wanted to have in some of these outlying counties that we still were really heavy in King and Snohomish County. So last year, we did try to start cutting out some of the wetlands out of the King and Snohomish County. And even though it's not represented here very well, we had some issues with getting surveyors up there. So we had a lot more wetlands that were ready to be surveyed, and we simply didn't have the surveyors to survey them. But so, for instance, in Whatcom County, I think we have 15 wetlands, but we didn't get them all surveyed. So in 2022, we surveyed a few less than we did in 2021. But part of that was because we were intentionally cutting some of these out of King and Snohomish so we can have better distribution across the different counties. Oops, I'm going to go back. This looks like the same chart, but it is very similar. It's just that this is the number of observation points as opposed to the number of wetlands. So out of the 39 wetlands that we started with, we had 97 observation points, and you can just see that it's similar. We grew in observation points as we did with adding the wetlands. So this is a distribution of the wetlands that we surveyed. This is from 2021, but in all honesty, at this scale, 2022 looked almost identical. So I kind of had these graphics ready to go. So we kind of went with these graphics. And each one of these wetlands can be zoomed in to kind of see what it looks like close up. So this is representative of that wetland that I just shared the story on, that is a mitigation bank. So you can kind of zoom in, and this is where the real value of this effort comes. We're going to look at some of the distribution images here in just a minute across the trough, but when you're really trying to understand what to do in these wetlands, like the best use of this survey is really site specific. So, having this information at each of these wetlands is really valuable and important over time. So we'll go back, just take a real quick look at the number of wetlands that we surveyed. And then here is a look at where we found American Bittern. So these really light colored circles, like this one that I'm pointing to, that's where we saw some bitterns, but not very many. And then as you proceed to these darker purple circles, that's where we're seeing, multiple bitterns within a wetland. So you can see there's a few darker circles. A couple of things to kind of take in from this distribution is just noticing that these darker circles are really outside our urban areas, that they're really, here, this is, sort of the Seattle area right in here, and you're just not seeing a lot of these large bittern birds there, that they tend to be sort of out in the rural areas and some of the larger unpopulated wetlands, as compared to Virginia rail, which has a lot of adaptability for those urban wetlands. So you can see that we're seeing, large numbers of Virginia rail across, across a lot of our urban and rural landscapes. They just have adaptability to be successful in a variety of wetlands, from small, even, somewhat degraded wetlands to, some of our larger pristine wetlands. And so we just have a, broader distribution of those. This one was a little bit of a surprise to me because I always think of Sora as being one of those birds that's sort of difficult to find. And yet when we actually went looking for them, we found quite a few. And they also tended to, do relatively well in some of those urban wetlands. So they were, was kind of nice. Again, sort of the, where we find a lot of value in this effort, this survey effort is, really zooming in on a specific wetland so that we can see trends over time. That's what's gonna, hopefully allow us to do some real conservation strategy on a site-specific basis. And if you look at this is back at that mitigation bank where we had, really a lot of wetland birds. We had American Bittern, we had Sora, we also had Virginia rail. And then these little points, that I mentioned are sort of giving you an indication of density for what we detected. So if we take a look at our detection table over just the last couple of years, so this top section is for 2021, and you can notice that, across all three windows, so all of our detections, we detected across three windows, 65 bittern, 614 Virginia rail, etc., down through green heron. And then if we look at the mode, or the highest number that we detected in any of the windows, you can see that we had across the study, we had 27, American Bittern, 237, Virginia rail, etc. And then the mean, or the average, is kind of, across the three windows, what we were looking at. And then if we drop down to 2022, you can see that these numbers are significantly less. So if we were to just sort of look at these 2 years, we would, we might come to the conclusion that we had a precipitous drop in our wetland bird species from, over these 2 years. But if we look at a little bit different, a little bit longer view, so we've included some 2019 data in here. Now, if you remember, what we were all doing in 2020 was we were all hiding in our houses, or we were in shutdown mode. We were on lockdown mode because of COVID. And so we were not able to survey in 2020. And if you now look at this data across those, 3 years, with 2020 being out, you can see that the data from last year, actually for most of our species, was quite similar to pre-COVID. So, you might take a guess at what might be happening here during the 2021 surveys, because we saw these big leaps. And that's consistent with a lot of other wildlife surveys that showed that while people were on lockdown and they, people weren't out with their, hiking in these landscapes, walking their dogs, doing different things, recreating in these areas, that wildlife tended to come into these areas. And so, while I don't have the, the actual numbers and the proof to this, my best guess is that we saw a lot of birds come in 2020 when we weren't out there in these spaces, and they were successful in breeding. And so, we had this residual higher numbers in 2021. I think that, again, with the Virginia rail, where they have this sort of amazing plasticity and ability to sort of, really thrive across a variety of wetlands. I think we're just seeing a jump there because they did so well in 2021. Now, I think I've mentioned that we run through our broadcast twice, which makes it 20 minutes long. And there's a real reason that under the standard protocol that broadcast is only 10 minutes. Keep in mind that a lot of these surveys are done by paid staff, by some of our wildlife agencies. And so somewhere you always have to kind of find a balance that says, what is efficient? If we have our staffs out there for 10 minutes, are we getting the kind of information that we need? And since these are really long-term types of studies that are designed to look at trends over time, that 10 minutes is great. It's perfect. We had the luxury of having these volunteers that were willing to be out there for 20 minutes. And we noticed that in 2019, we were looking, if we looked at our responses per minute, for instance, this is the Sora, and we're playing this broadcast, and as the minutes tick by, it comes to the Sora response right there at minute 6. And of course, we get a high number of responses right away. And then that sort of ticks through the other calls, starts with another 5 minutes of silence. And then our data was showing this additional jump. Well, birds move around, and we weren't sure if this second jump was the same birds that we were hearing back here, or if they were new birds. And so starting in 2019, we really asked and trained our volunteers to really justify whether or not these birds that we were catching later on in the broadcast were new birds or the same birds that had already been detected back here for the first broadcast. And I just have to praise our volunteers. They're just so amazing. And we'd get these data sheets in, and the comments would be, I'm confident that this is a new bird because it's on the opposite side of the road behind me, and nothing flew across. So I'm confident this was a new bird. And our surveyors were so good at really justifying that these were new birds that they were hearing, that it became valuable to us to maintain, to retain, or to keep the entire 20 minutes of broadcast. We think possibly how this might be valuable is, again, remember we talked about these first 5 minutes of silence being an opportunity to think about detectability. These surveys are usually never designed from a standard protocol, are typically never designed to detect all the birds that are in the area. They're only detected, but they are designed to detect a certain number so that they can assess trends over time. But if we look at what we're collecting and we see that we have these additional new birds who have literally just been sitting in the reeds, hunched up, wondering what's going on, who's calling in their territory, and finally, when the second call comes through, they get enough, they're encouraged enough that they respond, that they make a noise, and we detect them. So if we know that there's this group of birds that are out there, and then we know that there's an additional group of birds out there, that might help inform some of these algorithms that sort of sort out detectability. So that's why, one of the reasons why we've sort of kept this 20-minute, this sort of long broadcast time. You can see that over 2021 and 2022, that this was really pretty consistent. Picture for both Sora and Virginia rail. It's a little bit different for some of our other species. Interesting enough, you'll see that some of the highest detections of American bittern is as people are walking into the wetland. So in other words, they're detecting that bird right at the very beginning at minute 1. It does respond, obviously responds to the broadcast, but it's also vocalizing as we walk into the wetlands. And same with pied-billed grebes. They don't tend to be a real quiet bird, not nearly as secretive as some of the others that we're looking at. So you can see that they're vocalizing just as you walk into the wetland. So these regional projects, these kind of long-term modeling, monitoring efforts can, they answer some questions for us. They let us know where the birds are and roughly kind of numbers for these birds, but they also give rise to a whole new, suite of questions. We've certainly become more and more aware of the significant differences between species. We monitor these things together. We monitor shorebirds together, we monitor wetland birds together, or other groups of birds together, but they really are uniquely different. And so it's quite possible that maybe in the future we might sort of take a look at some of these species individually, to kind of find out how they fare in the landscape. And even though we get all this information, these detections really don't tell us anything about nest success or dispersion or movement of these birds. And they certainly are not telling us why birds are in this wetland when we've selected wetlands under the same criteria. So why are birds in this wetland and not in that other wetland? So those are some of the questions that we still are thinking about, how we might design some new projects to kind of take a look at some of these additional questions. And certainly life histories matter. There's just so much that we don't know about these secretive birds. So planning for the future, obviously we're going to continue with the monitoring. Again, we just have a couple years of data, and it really is those trend analysis that we want to be looking at. We will continue to kind of fidget with the spatial layout of the wetlands that we're monitoring, so that we have a little more equality around the Puget Sound Trough. This is a recruitment year for this project, so we are looking to build the team, hoping maybe some of you will join us. We're definitely looking at some potential new legs to this monitoring project for maybe some potential covariant looking at things like how, if we look at some of the same wetlands that another group is looking at for amphibians, how does that pair up at all with maybe what we're finding for American bittern, who, preys on amphibians? So we may be looking at some covariant monitoring. We're definitely looking forward to providing some, specific site support information to maybe look at some of these wetlands for enhancements or improvements that might help either the existing wetland birds that are there, or maybe bring in some wetland birds to some spot. And then this new collaboration with the Canadian partners, which just gives us a broader geographical look at these wetland birds, is really exciting. So maybe some of you would like to help. Some ways in which you can help is, we're looking for new wetlands. So if anyone is aware of some wetlands in particularly Whatcom, Skagit, Thurston, Mason, Kitsap counties that sort of meet these criteria, I'd love to hear from you. We do need volunteer monitors, and we'll begin our training probably late February. So if you're interested, you can certainly get a hold of me, and we'll keep you in that loop for when the trainings are going to be. But that's sort of the things that we're sort of looking for in our volunteers, is we really want folks that are invested in the science. I think I mentioned that, if you're out there for, 3 sets of 20 minutes where you are, getting null data, there's no response, no birds, it can be sort of a challenging effort. So, if you're only interested in this project because you want to see the cool birds, you might be disappointed. But if you're interested in this project because you really are invested in the science of it, there's a lot to offer here. We do appreciate it, as much as possible. We don't hold anyone to this, but we do appreciate, as much as possible, a commitment to 6 surveys. So that means a couple per window, or you could even do all 6 in a single window. It doesn't matter. But one of the limiting abilities we have, or the limiting capacities we have is the sets of equipment that we own. And so if we can get people to survey, multiple times, it's getting the most efficient use out of that equipment that we have to check out. And then, this isn't a big issue, but, some physical capabilities to maneuver in these wetlands is appreciated. We have wetlands that are, just on a boardwalk and very easy to monitor, but we do have some that are kind of rugged too. And I'm hoping that one of the tasks that lays before me is to really kind of take a look at our wetlands, and I'd like to sort of give them a grade so that people knew whether or not this was an easy wetland to do, or one of the more difficult ones. Hopefully we'll do that. But we have had some folks who have volunteered for this effort and then found that there's really quite a bit of walking to do, or maybe some landscape that's a little difficult to navigate across. And so kind of keeping those things in mind is important too. If you really are excited about this project and you want to help out, there's all kinds of ways, that you can sort of, really step in and help with, recruitment of volunteers or equipment distribution, different things like that. So, those are always helpful ways of volunteering as well. So if you're interested, I invite you to get in touch with me. I can be reached directly at the contact at PugetSoundBirds.org. Or give me a phone call. You can also reach me through our website at PugetSoundBirds.org. I will say, I mentioned we had a recent passing and recent death in our family, and so I'm a little behind. So if you reach out, email me, it may take a couple of weeks for me to get back to you. But please do. We're eager to hear from you, and we'd love to have you join us in our effort. So I'm open for questions. I hope I didn't lose you all.
Not in the least. Not in the least.
So
I really enjoyed going walking with you in some of those different terrains. It's really fun. I'm going to stop sharing. Just a quick note. I just really want to appreciate, we've had some funding partners, Tuolumne Tribes, and Fish and Wildlife, and of course our amazing team of volunteers.
Hooray. I have to start by reading Jean Trent's. Many of you know Jean, and Jean has been a devoted volunteer with not only this, but many studies. But Jean said that she wanted to reassure anyone who hadn't quite decided that they were going to volunteer that she has done many surveys and there was never any sign of bears. That's a great story. Oh, I love that first one. My gosh. And that you got your cell phone up there and captured.
Yes, which Elaine knows how, I barely can handle binoculars. So to actually get my phone up and take that video was like star quality for me.
Will we invite you, wonderful audience members, if you've been now thinking, I got a question. I have one, a really good one. And I remember, Cindy, when we first started the pilot study and you explained how this was going, and with the rationale that these birds don't just pipe up like our song sparrows, that playback would be an essential part of detecting them. But I remember being bothered, and here's your opportunity to answer again with your wisdom of it. What's the effect? Do we know what the effect is of using playback on these birds and their behavior and their sense of life?
Well, that it's a great question. And I think, that becomes sort of that benefit
Outweighs.
sort of question, weighing it. So one of the things that I hammer on very, very strictly in our training is that we give you the privilege of having this sound file, but we really ask that you never use it outside this survey effort. We recognize that we are impacting these birds when we play these broadcasts. So we keep it as much to a minimum as we possibly can. And in fact, again, just a shout out to our volunteers, because we had several volunteers this past year. The pied-billed grebe particularly gets very agitated at the playback. And so we had a lot of volunteers who, did not actually utilize the pied-billed grebe, the second pied-billed grebe playback, because they already had agitated birds in front of them. And there was no reason to, get them troubled. But I will say, at this point, I have surveyed hundreds of wetlands and used this broadcast hundreds of times. And quite often what you get is an interested bird, like, whoa. And we don't know what we're saying to them. I mean, we may be saying, hey, I'm a 10-foot bittern and I've come to take your territory. We really don't know what we're saying to them. But for the most part, just from our, really limited and unsatisfactory human perspective, what I get is that these birds are interested. They're like, oh, that sounds like another bird. And they'll come out and they may respond, or they may, they may vocalize. But for the most part, it's curious, the sense that you get is curiosity more than agitation. So, I think anytime we're really, we're not out there to agitate the birds by any means. So I think that using a little bit of discretion, if a bird's out there and it's in front of you and it's agitated, we certainly don't need to, bother it again.
Well, it sounds like that Google sign up is a way to make sure that you don't have too many people going to any one place repetitively.
Right. There's so there really is. It's just 3 surveys per wetland. We visit 3 times. So that broadcast is only played 3 times at that wetland.
I have a little curiosity about what you cover in the training. You saw there was a classroom session, and then you get to practice.
There is, yeah. We haven't actually. So the last couple of years, we really have not been able to do the field practicum, which I think is one of the most fun. But I think that this year we will be able to revisit that as we all begin to re-engage with life. But so the classroom section, we cover navigational skills. We cover bird ID. And it's always really nice when someone comes to us with pretty strong birding skills. But these birds make such unique noises, and they're such unique looking birds that new birders, fairly folks that are fairly new to the birding experience can certainly be a part of this project without any problem. So we cover some bird ID, we cover the protocol, definitely cover, filling out the data sheets and using all of the Google documents and all of those things. So the training takes quite a while.
I have to throw out one of those sort of intangibles, but Jean, Trent, and Carlin, I mean, there's quite a few of your fans that are on this meeting right here. And gosh, we've gotten to know each other more. And yes, being able to go out and seek some bits of input, a bit of science for a purpose with your friends. Oh my gosh. Mana from heaven. Thank you, Cynthia.
We do encourage people to go out in pairs. For one thing, it's a safety it's a safety thing. But also, I'm this particular survey effort. I'm of the strong belief that 4 ears and 4 eyes are more beneficial than 2. And so it's always nice to have someone, who could collaborate, in terms of what they might be hearing. I think there's also kind of a question, of, sometimes as we get older, our hearing is not as strong. And so it's nice to, have someone else there that you can kind of say, did you hear that?
Right.
Obviously, the goal is not to count, specifically to count how many of which birds are there. But do you know if some of the volunteers, in fact, do report to eBird that they saw, they identified, say, 3 Virginia rails at a particular place? So there's
we do count the number.
benefit.
Yeah, we do count the number. That's another. It's a bit of a, I have this sort of love-hate relationship with eBird. I just love it for all of the information and wonderful documentation that birders do on it. We can't force anyone, but we do ask people not necessarily to be broadcasting where we're finding these birds. And again, it's because they are secretive. Their reclusive nature is part of their life strategy. And so if we're suddenly telling everyone where these bitterns are, and particularly if these bitterns or rails, or if they are in a very public wetland, and all of a sudden we have, a flock of people coming and broadcasting because we don't have control, so they're just broadcasting off of their phone, we're going to lose these birds. And so, I really, we request in our training that the broadcast never be used outside of the survey effort. And then we also sort of request that people, keep the information sort of quiet.
Makes a lot of sense.
Well, big sigh, because that kind of philosophy is becoming less and less possible in all parts of our life. But let's go to something more scientifically enlightening. Nice question from Helen. Cindy, I don't even know anything about migratory status. I know that occasionally Sora that migrates at night, but can you tell us in a small nutshell what the migratory patterns of these, in which are year-round residents?
Yeah, that's a great question. We know that some of these birds will stick around, particularly Virginia rail and American bittern will stick around year-round, but they tend to have, short migration or movements. I don't even want to call it migration, but they will tend to move to different spaces, really depending on just prey for the most part. Where can I find some food? And so, but we know so little. We were really hoping that as we were as PSBO is sort of looking at these MODIS tracking systems, I was really excited and hoping that we could maybe get some tracking devices on some of these birds, because we know so little about their movements, and we know almost next to nothing about dispersion. Like, what happens? These birds fledge their young, and then where do these young go? Like, how do they disperse into other wetlands? And we know virtually nothing about that. So unfortunately, the MODIS tracking is probably not going to work for these wetland birds, but it is something that we're hoping to look into with some other kinds of tracking devices to kind of better understand these movements of these birds. But we've seen bittern stick around until December, and then all of a sudden sort of be gone. But Virginia rails stick around year round in quite a few of our spaces, and some of them move. So we might, but yes.
Do you have any?
Wish we knew more.
Yeah, sorry. Do you have any early reflections on the other species that are not secretive birds, that is marsh wren and willow flycatcher, as collected in this study? Anything learned about marsh wrens in particular?
Not really yet. And that's probably one of the things that we're going to address a little bit more this year. Understandably, our surveyors get out there and they're really focused on these wetland birds. And so a lot of the data that comes back to me about marsh wrens and willow flycatchers is choppy. Either people forget to, mark down, or what they mark down has not put them in the, kind of silos that we've needed them to be in to analyze. So I haven't quite figured out what to do. With the information that we collected on marsh wrens and willow flycatchers at this point. It's data that we've collected. We just haven't really been able to parse out anything that makes some sense.
Well, it's just lovely to have any even distant and invisible contact with most of these birds. Anyone else? Questions?
Well, Cindy, thank you so much. This was really informative, and I think many of us got a sense that this could be really interesting. to get it done. And I hope it does generate people, and you are able to get out and sample many more wetlands in more places so that you get a more complete picture of what it's like all through Puget Sound. If there are no other questions, thank you again for a very informative presentation and very enjoyable. And thank our audience for attending, and hope you'll join us next month when the focus will be on ferruginous hawks. And I think I cut Elaine off saying Happy New Year to everybody.
Yay.
Okay, well, have a great evening and a happy month, and hope to see you next month.
Yes, thank you very much.